Welcome into another episode of Patrick Jones Baseball. In this week's episode, we have Cole Schaffer on the podcast. Cole is the head baseball coach at Thomas More University in Northern Kentucky. Previously, he was the recruiting coordinator and assistant coach at Ohio Dominican University in Columbus. Known Cole for several years now, and he does a phenomenal job as a coach, always looking to learn, always constantly pushing himself. And this is going to be his first year as a head coach at the collegiate level. So as Thomas More is a Division II program, they have phenomenal facilities. And so Cole's going to walk you through kind of like his plan to take this program from where it's been in the last couple of years, which hasn't been at a very high level, and take it to a level it's never been before. So it's pretty cool to be able to see like what the plan's going to be before it happens. And then I'm sure we'll have Cole back on halfway through or maybe towards the beginning of the season, see what he's found out so far, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Cole Schaffer. All right, we now welcome onto the podcast, Cole Schaffer. Cole, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, Patrick. Good to be here, man. Big fan of the podcast.
Thanks, dude. Well, so you just became the head coach at Thomas More, Division II program in Northern Kentucky, which is awesome. And, obviously I want to pick your brain a little bit on, your own background and kind of how you got to the point you're at. But I guess I first wanted to start out, one, just say congratulations. And then two, when you take since now you're taking over a program, and you've been a head coach, you've had some head coaching experience in the past, but now that you're, the head coach at Thomas More Division II college program, what are some of the first things that a college coach does when they take over a new program?
Yeah, first of all, thanks, man. What a cool opportunity this is, and super fortunate to get it. And like you mentioned, I've had head coaching experience. It's been in college summer ball. It hasn't necessarily been at the NCAA level. So, it's a big learning period. There's certainly a learning curve associated with it. But, when you kind of get in the door here, obviously kind of taking a look at what you got on the roster. So we had 31 guys return, which is a little bit smaller. But there's 31 guys that want to be here. There's 31 guys that are dedicated to the program. So first and foremost, getting a relationship with those guys and talking to them. So that was a team's call that we started with, and then reaching out to all of them individually, just kind of picking their brain on their experience so far and kind of why they chose Thomas More was where we got started at with that on the player side of stuff. And then at that point, you're looking to hire a coaching staff because you definitely can't do it all on your own. So I was fortunate to bring Brennan Hunt along with me. Brennan played for me and then coached with me at Ohio Dominican, and it's someone that I trust immensely. So, while this is a huge adjustment for me, I knew it was important to surround myself with people that I trust. And it was a no-brainer to make sure he's going to be on board with us here. And then also going out and hiring a GA. We hired a GA who was a student manager at UC as well. And once you get that stuff taken care of, then it kind of is business as usual. It's definitely an adjustment from being an assistant, and now you're kind of handling more of the administrative and operational day-to-day stuff. But as we get settled into that, it starts to become more and more old hat and more comfortable every day. So we get started with that stuff there as far as the program and day-to-day is concerned. And then ultimately you start making recruiting connections in the area. So I'm coming from Columbus. We knew the Columbus area really well. Getting into Cincinnati was a big point of emphasis for us the second year when I was at ODU. So we had some connections down this way as well. Getting familiar with Northern Kentucky, and then down into Lexington and Louisville was kind of where it got started on the recruiting end.
You talked about right there, like the recruiting side of things. Like, what does that look like now that you're the head coach, right? Are you somebody who's like, is it different for each program, especially the Division II level? Like everyone knows Division I, you could have 34 full scholarships if the program is fully funded. But how does it work at the Division II level? Like how many scholarships are you allowed at the Division II level? What's common? And then are you able to pair it with academics? Like how does that all work?
Yeah, so it's completely dependent upon the institution. The NCAA allows a Division II program to have 9 full scholarships. That's the maximum. It's up to the institution to decide what they're going to disperse to everybody. So there's plenty of fully funded programs in the country. We're not one of them, to be truthful about it, but our financial situation will never be an excuse for us. I think if we go out and we recruit well, do our job, sell our school, sell our program, and certainly the facility we play at is beautiful, that's plenty good enough to get the talent that we need to be successful. So it's 9 scholarships on that end.
Do you think that there's I actually don't. I don't think there's a better facility at the Division II level. I mean, heck, even probably most D1s than what you guys have at Thomas More. I mean, the facility is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's great. So we play at Thomas More Stadium here in Florence, Kentucky. We share that place with the Florence Y'alls. We're the two main tenants of that place. So they're wrapping their season up here within the next week or two, and then we're going to be in there, 5 days a week during the fall, and then practically every day there in the spring. So we'll play our full home game schedule. And like we just mentioned, there's not a better Division II facility in the country as far as I'm concerned than the things that we have access to in that place. We've got our own locker room. There's indoor cages that we've got access to. There's an indoor weight room. We've got a second set of offices down there and everything like that. And it's just key fob access for us, so we can kind of get in there anytime we want, which is, tremendous for us to have something like that. It's a huge recruiting tool for us. A lot of kids in this area are fortunate enough to play some summer ball games down at that stadium. They've been down there before, they've seen it, and they've experienced what it has to offer. But I think it does just add a little bit something extra special when you're wearing a Thomas More uniform and you get to go play at Thomas More Stadium. I think it just means a little bit more.
What's the vision you have for Thomas More baseball?
So the vision is something that we've been talking about as a staff a lot, and kind of creating what that's going to look like and how we're going to sell that to recruits. And I think this situation is unique with it being a situation where Thomas More has experienced a lot of success really kind of in the pretty near past within the last couple years. So the program as a whole started in 1956. It was a Division III program until 2021. And they got interested in kind of moving over to Division II to bridge that gap. They were an NAIA school for 2 years, and I think 2021 or 2022, that was a 29-win season. 23 was a 31-win season, and then they move into Division II in the GMAC in 2024 and 2025. And I think those 2 seasons were a little rough, a little bumpy. I think it was 31 wins combined in those 2 seasons. But the cool thing for us is, the older guys on the roster, they were around for that 31-win season a couple years ago at the NAI level. So they understand what it tastes like. You need people like that in the building. It's always good to be surrounded by winners. So for us, it's kind of just getting things back on the tracks. I don't believe that this is a rebuilding situation at all. I think everything is set in place for us to go out and have success immediately. And I think everybody here believes that we can get everybody in the room right now on the same page and things are going to be good. And if you bring in a great group of 26s and 27s and recruits there beyond, then I really do believe the sky can be the limit for this program.
You've personally coached at the NAI level. I know you mentioned Thomas More at one point for a few years was NAI level. There's a lot of people out there who don't know, quite honestly, and you can't blame them, like the differences in competition at the NAI level versus D2. In your experience, what is is the competition better or worse? Like, what is the differences between NAIA and then Division II?
I think it really just depends on what part of the country you're in. I think the farther north you get, northeast, I guess is probably the best way to say it. I think the NAI level is pretty comparable to Division II or potentially maybe Division II and a half baseball. There's some teams that are really, really good, and there's some teams that struggle a little bit. But ultimately, it's a really good level of baseball. I can speak to my experience. I was down south at LSU Shreveport for a year, and that program can hang with any Division I program in the country. There's no doubt about it. There's talent oozing out of that place. Obviously, they've had a ton of success recently with just going 59-0 and winning the national championship, which is completely unheard of. Not just in college baseball, but in baseball in general. They have the talent to show for that. And there's plenty of programs all over the country, whether it be in Florida or in Louisiana and Texas, or you even get up into the Northwest or down into California. There's tremendous baseball programs at that level. And I think we're just in a part of the country here, maybe in Ohio, where NAIA baseball just maybe a little bit underrepresented. And I think that the same can be said for junior college baseball in this area, where there's just not a lot of representation. So with that comes a pretty limited knowledge base on that. But obviously with junior college baseball, if you get out into the Midwest, it's the best of the best out there. And kind of just depends on where you're at in the country. As it pertains to Division II baseball, it's similar, but I think it's spread out. You're going to find really, really good Division II programs that are competing on a regional and a national level every single year here in the Midwest, or you get over into Pennsylvania or down into Maryland. Those teams can hang with anybody as well. And then obviously Division III baseball has a tremendous presence in this part of the country in the Midwest, with Denison being, 35 minutes outside of Columbus. And that's a national championship contender every year. I believe they were the number 2 or the number 1 team in the country this year for a good part of the season. And, when I was at Ohio Dominican, we had the opportunity to play them in the fall, and I got out to watch them during the playoffs. And, They're as good as anybody. They're as fundamentally sound as anybody. And if you want to watch good baseball, you can find it anywhere, and that's certainly a good place to go check it out.
Yeah, Division III baseball in Ohio it's got to be the best in the country. And I remember you actually telling me after you went to go watch Denison play this year, you're like, man, I watched 3 games and like every one of their starters was 89 to 91, and it was just like it was insane how good they were. But Mike Deegan, their head coach, does a phenomenal job, and he's just a really good guy too. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, when it comes to like the actual process of identifying players, recruiting players, like what is that process like? Or maybe like what has that process been like for you? And like what do you think it's going to be like at Thomas More? Is it going to be any different now that you're like, okay, I'm the head coach now, maybe I can do things a little bit differently than in the past? Like what's kind of your thought process on it?
I don't think too much is going to change for me and kind of my beliefs and what we're looking for, at least from the last 2 years with my experience at Ohio Dominican. Obviously, Chris Antonis is the head coach there, and he does a great job. He does everything the right way, and it was an honor for me to be a part of that program and kind of learn how he does stuff with those guys and what type of players he's looking for in the recruiting process. And that was something I got really comfortable with. And I believe that over the course of the 2 years there, we were able to find some really, really talented players, not just in the Columbus area, but if you branch up into Northeast Ohio or even that Toledo area, and certainly down towards Cincinnati, you can find those talented players. And everybody's recruiting model is different. Everybody's looking for a different kind of player. I think Division II baseball is really cool because there's a bunch of different ways to win games. If offensively, if you can hit the long ball, then that's always got its place in the game. But in some respects, unlike Division I baseball, the teams that can play, really, really good small ball, those teams can compete at a really high level too. I know Kentucky in 2024 was a good example of a small ball team that ended up going, but there's a bunch of different ways to do it. And I think the nice thing is that you can kind of outfit the philosophy for whatever the strength of the players in your program are. So for right now, that could be year to year until we've got full recruiting classes set in place for what we're really looking for on the athleticism standpoint, and then it can become more consistent. But I do believe that being adjustable within the game is important, especially as it pertains to offense, and really finding a philosophy that's going to work best for the players that you have in house. Find something that you believe in and get it running at a high level, and then you can start recruiting to that as well.
I know you had said in the past that you like recruiting football guys who have played football. Does that still hold true?
Absolutely. We love recruiting football guys. I think it just brings a different element of toughness and understanding discipline and expectation. Obviously you don't need to have played football to be a guy that gets recruited by us, but Coach Hunt was a high school football player, and he's always going to be partial to guys like that. So, we love to get out and watch guys play high school football as a part of the recruiting process. I know we've got a trip planned here to Columbus here in a couple weeks to get back to watch a high school football game. That's something we're looking forward to. So, getting a chance to see the leadership that the guys have on the football field and how that may transition to the baseball field. And like I mentioned, just toughness. Getting to see stuff like that on display in an element outside of baseball is something I think is really neat.
The ball flies like crazy, Thomas More Stadium, where you guys are going to be playing at. So are you gonna be recruiting to that? Like, oh, we need to get guys who can prove that they can show that they can get the ball in the air, that have a little bit of power, because our home ballpark is going to play to that since the ball carries so much. And then maybe on the flip side, from a pitching standpoint, maybe are we looking for more sinker ballers, guys with lower release points, so try to get more ground balls versus guys who are more over the top and more maybe prone to having have hitters who get the ball able to get the ball in the air a little bit easier.
Sure. Yeah, no, the place is a launch pad. And I've only been down here late April the last 2 years with Ohio Dominican. In 2024, it was, 75 degrees and sunny. And I think in that 4 game series, I think we hit 14 home runs. So the ball flies out of here like crazy. That was a fun weekend for us. This past year wasn't as fun, but no, the ball certainly flies. And, as it pertains to recruiting, I think you got to find a little bit of everything. I think the thing you can do for your program is bring in guys that are versatile. So if you can have guys that hit the ball over the fence at a high rate, that's going to be great for you to plug those guys in the middle of your lineup. But there's so many other things within the game that are important that you're going to need to be successful as a program, because there's going to be days where the ball's not always flying, and we can't just be resting back and expecting somebody to, wait around for somebody to hit the big 3-run home run, because there's a really good chance that there's a lot of days that doesn't happen. You got to find different ways to win a baseball game. So I think that goes into, just recruiting really athletic kids that have the opportunity to, change the trajectory of a game in more ways than one. But there's always going to be a place in the lineup for the big guys that can leave the yard. But I think it is equally as important to make sure that you're finding guys that can fill every other role in the lineup that you need. And then as it pertains to the pitching side of it, looking at kind of the trends of college baseball and sort of how things are going on the mound. Obviously, there's going to be some programs that just pitch it at a really high level and have a reputation for developing pitchers. And there's some programs just like that in our conference and Division II baseball all over the map. I think for us, it's important to find guys with pitchability and guys that are able to compete in the strike zone. That's first and foremost. That's how you're going to get on our radar here at Thomas More as a pitcher. If you can do that and you can prove that to us, that's when the interest really starts for us, because then you can start to see a vision for the guy, and maybe you can start looking at some things to develop. Everybody is chasing velocity right now. Velocity is great if you have it, but I think in some respects it's forced on some kids, where they're told that, if you're not 88 to 90, you're not a Division II baseball player anymore. If you're not 94 to 96, you're not a Division I baseball player anymore. I don't think that's true. I think you can be effective at really anywhere on the spectrum. If you're a left-handed pitcher and you can kind of thumb it up there, 79, 82, but you've got some good arm side run and you can mix and match. A pitcher like that's going to have success at the Division II level. So finding guys with that type of pitchability with room to grow is super important for us. And those are the guys that we're after. And you can always look at the pitches that they do have, look at the arsenal that they do have, and maybe you like the shape of a breaking ball, and maybe there's ways that you can make that better, or maybe a guy that you can just tell watching him, he spins the fastball really well. And that's a guy that's going to have a lot of success in his career living up in the zone. There's a bunch of different scenarios, and I think everybody's different. And I think the best thing that we can do is bring in guys with different types of skill sets. If you can change looks on hitters, that's always a good thing.
So it's less about, because this is obviously a question that I'm sure I would get after you just saying, kind of what you're looking for, especially on the pitching side of things. Wanting more guys who have secondary pitches that they can command for strikes and things like that. Is they're gonna, I'll get questions. Well, what about velocity? Like, what is the floor for velocity? Like, is there a certain number that it's like, man, you have to at least be at 80, or else at this point, like, we're not going to be interested? Like, is there a specific number, or is there just too many variables, because it's also going to depend on their body shape and size and things like that too? Or do you have something specific or a range for
I
that
think
matter?
all those things go into it. I think first and foremost, when you're looking at the body of the kid, and trying to kind of project out what this kid's going to look like as a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, I think those guys are the guys that you're willing to take a chance on, more so if they're on that lower spectrum of velocity, as opposed to maybe somebody that is either completely fully developed for some reason as an 18-year-old high school kid, and you really see a super high ceiling for them. Maybe those are the guys that you shy away from a little bit. But, as velocity goes, with kind of getting on the map, certainly, being an upper 80s arm or low 90s arm at this level is always going to get you on someone's radar. I don't think that many people are just going to offer you based on a recorded velocity or anything like that. They're going to want to get out and see you pitch and see how you handle hitters, and see how you're game planning for guys, and all that stuff. But I think just as a general, kind of guideline, I think if you're in that, 84 to 87 range as a rising high school senior, going into your senior year, I think that's always good enough to get you on someone's radar at this level. And then on the other side, if you're throwing from the left side, I think if you're in anywhere in that, 81 to 84 range, that's probably good for a left-handed arm to get you on someone's radar as well, because, left-handed pitching isn't exactly a dime a dozen at this level. And if you can find a good one that you can bring into your program and develop, those are the guys that, typically have a lot of success.
Love that. Love that. And now I want to ask you a question here. We'll just play a scenario out. Like, let's say you're recruiting me to come to Thomas More, and I come to Thomas More and I'm on a visit. I'm meeting with you. I'm meeting with Brennan, and and basically you're saying, hey, we want you to come here, blah blah. And then you hear me say that my ultimate goal is to play Division I baseball, and I would be coming here to put up numbers to eventually transfer. Is that a red flag for you?
For us, that's a red flag. When we're recruiting kids, we want this to be a 4-year commitment for them. We want this for them to be a place that they're going to spend the rest of their career and get their degree in 4 years. Our school is very academic driven. If you take Kentucky and Louisville out of the picture, there's not a better academic school in the state of Kentucky than Thomas More. So academics will always be first and foremost, and we need guys that are going to come in and excel in the classroom for us. And then everything baseball wise is a secondary priority, still a priority nonetheless, but academics will always take the driver's seat in that respect. But as the transfer portal is used, I think everybody uses it in different ways. And you see it used a lot, with Division II baseball, with guys making that next jump, up to Division I baseball. And that's certainly not something that's uncommon. Again, while I'm expecting everybody that signs up with us to be here for 4 years, I think it's very possible that somewhere down the line, we develop somebody into being a Division I baseball player. And ultimately, it'll be that player's decision to, decide to test the waters on that. I think there's so much uncertainty with just kind of rosters and everything, at least this year with college baseball, that unless you're rock solid certain about getting in the transfer portal and there's going to be an opportunity there, it can be a risk. And really the risk lies within not getting an opportunity at that level that you thought you might get an opportunity at. And then maybe the door's closed at your previous institution. Maybe that staff doesn't want you back. That's a serious possibility that I think guys getting in the transfer portal need to really, really evaluate and make sure that this decision that they're making to go out and find a new place is really going to be the right decision for them and for their career. Because I'm sure that there's a ton of stories out there of guys having success doing exactly this, but certainly the grass is not always greener on the other side.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because we always hear about, and I'm guilty of this too. Like I always talk about the kids you hear about who did transfer and it ended up working out, right? But you don't ever hear about the kid, and this is the majority of the kids who did transfer and it didn't work out at all. And so to your point, like, yeah, that you definitely want to be careful of the fact that the grass is not always greener. And it's something that I think more players should think about and talk to people who are in the know. And I think one of the things that I did want to ask you about, and just to follow up on the transfer portal, is how many coaches out there, and maybe you can only speak to yourself and the programs that you've been out at How Dominican and now at Thomas More, but is it pretty normal for coaches to say like, hey, if you go in the transfer portal and you don't get any offers or anything, like you can't come back here? Would you say that's the norm, or is that abnormal?
I think at the beginning that was very normal. I think maybe it has started to adjust a little bit, but I do think that is probably majority of the time that is going to be the situation. I think ultimately the most common situation you're going to see with that, for example, if someone is going to leave a Division II program and let's say they're a scholarship player and they decide to get in the transfer portal and kind of test the waters with Division I baseball. Obviously, if he's going to test the waters with Division I baseball, he's probably a pretty good player. And that program he was just at, as long as the relationship was good, but that door may remain open, with the only kind of exception to that being that if things don't work out, you could come back, but I can't guarantee that your money is going to be there. I think that when that player decides they're getting in the transfer portal, they're foregoing whatever their athletic scholarship is, and that's going straight back into the recruiting budget, and that's going to be redistributed to the recruiting class or potentially even an incoming transfer. So while I think there is an opportunity to come back to the program that you were at, should that be the case, I would imagine that the conversation that usually happens between that head coach and the player is that you can go test the waters. If you decide to come back, I just can't guarantee that your money's going to be here.
And is that going to be your philosophy at Thomas More?
I think it's just depends. I think it's going to be case by case. Again, the relationship I think has a lot to do with it. The relationship you have with that player and kind of how he was as a student here, how he was as a teammate here, how he's treating people on campus and in the community. I think there's a lot of different tentacles attached to that. So the best answer I could give you on that is that it would just be case by case. But I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Parents, are you tired of spending money going from showcase to camp, not even knowing if a coach is even looking for your son's position or even knows his name? One of the reasons that I started my college baseball recruiting service is to help guide families throughout the recruiting process so you're not having to waste money and time going from showcase or camp to camp. If you're interested in hearing more about how I can help your son, head to patrickjonesbaseball.com and fill out the form. That's patrickjonesbaseball.com, fill out the form right on the homepage, and I'll be in touch. All right, back to the podcast. One of the things that someone told me when I was way younger, I was actually playing independent baseball. Cole, you'll like this. I think I was 25 years old. and I was playing in the Pecos League. I was
Hmm.
making $57 a week. And then I was talking to somebody who was much older than me. Sif Shaw is his name. He's a high school coach here in Cincinnati now at Milford High School. But he played independent baseball a long time. Really good hitter, really good player. And he had told me something that I never forgot, and it didn't really click until later. He goes, "Look, if you're playing, independent baseball, minor league baseball, at any level of baseball, and your goal is to make it to X level, you're playing the game for the wrong reasons."
Hmm.
And I thought that was, like, crazy at the time, and it wasn't until later on that I realized, like, it comes back to, like, being outcome driven, like, you're solely doing something just to get to a specific outcome, whereas one, like, you're overlooking so many of the things that are right in front of you, like the joy of just playing the game, and you're actually robbing yourself a little bit of just the entire process, which is going to make you a much better player by focusing on things that you can't control at all. And so I think to your point, like I don't think it's not a good thing to go to any situation, whether I go to Thomas More or wherever I go and think like, oh, I'm just going to use this as a stepping stone to go somewhere else. Because in a nutshell, like you are kind of playing the game for the wrong reasons. Like if you play the game for the right reasons, because you love the game, you love working, you love getting better, opportunities will present themselves organically, not by you forcing them to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with that completely, and I think there's a lot of different narratives on the transfer portal and maybe certain intents with going to a certain program because they've got a reputation maybe for developing guys into Division I baseball players. There's different situations with like that all over the country, and every situation is its own situation. It's got a life of its own. But I think that's certainly the case. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think when you're choosing to go somewhere, I believe you should be choosing to go to that place because it feels like the right fit because you can feel yourself being there for 4 years. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given when I was a student athlete and going through the recruiting process was you need to pick a school. And when you pick this school, you need to make sure that this is a place that you would be happy living 4 years of your life if for some reason baseball got taken away. There's so many other things outside of baseball that are important to making that decision. Academics are important. Social life is important. If you like being close to home, that stuff can be important. And you really just never know when the game can be taken away. You need to be making sure. Obviously, you hope that never happens for anybody, but you need to be making sure that you're finding the right fit for you. And if for some crazy reason, baseball got taken away, you'd still be, a happy person being at that school, being a student at that school, living in that community, and everything like that. So that's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given. I try to tell people that as often as I can when we have guys on campus. And then also just you need to go where you're wanted. I think if you're using, the transfer portal as, kind of playing the long game and already have that on your radar, I think in a way you're cheating yourself. I think you're not allowing yourself to really enjoy your full experience at whatever school it is you decide to go to if you're really looking for a future at a different place. Maybe that place just wasn't the right place for you, but ultimately you didn't get recruited at that level initially, probably for a reason. But somebody saw something in you, somebody decided to take a chance on you, or somebody believed in a vision with you within that program. And I think it's just really important to go where you're wanted and not necessarily go where you want to go. Because everybody wants to go to XYZ school, play in the SEC, have a chance to go play in Omaha. Everybody wants to do that. But that's not realistic for 95% of people. For those other 95% of people where that's not the case, you need to go where you're wanted. I don't think that there's a better piece of advice than that for a guy that's getting recruited.
I love it. Yeah, I 100% agree. That's great stuff. I'm glad you said that. I got a few other questions and kind of topics I want to talk about with you. Like one, what is the practice schedule going to look like in terms of like how do you go about setting up the practice plan? Is it something where it's like we're going to hit X, Y, and Z every day? We're going to focus on hey being fundamentally sound, small ball, bunting because it is about scoring runs at the end of the day, and that's the difference. College baseball is not the same as Major League Baseball. It always fires people up when I bring up bunting, but it's about scoring runs. So who cares how you go about doing that. So what is the actual your philosophy on just fall ball, for example, like in the practice layout?
I think fall ball is a great opportunity to get, in my situation, get everything changed with everybody in the program, but in a more standard situation, get the freshmen and the newcomers on board with what it is you're trying to do and how you're trying to play the game. So for us, what that looks like at the very beginning is we're going to sit down as a coaching staff and we're going to list a long list of things that we want to work on with hitters. We're going to work on a list of things we want to work on with pitchers, infielders, catchers, and outfielders. It'll be a long list. That chart will break off into its own individual sheet with dates on it, and you'll basically be able to check off which dates you're working on these different things, as it pertains to hitters or pitchers or infielders, outfielders, catchers, whatever it is. That's sort of a way to keep it organized. Obviously, that's all done in advance. That stuff is scheduled out, so you're not just scrambling maybe the night before practice or the morning of a practice and looking at each other in a staff meeting saying what are we going to do today. I think organization is important. I think it's important as a coaching staff to really just make sure you're keeping your head on straight, but players need to be able to depend on that. I think players need to be able to depend on a consistent coaching staff that's going to be organized and that's going to communicate well. So for us, everything is going to be spelled out well in advance of what we're going to be working on day to day. And then maybe we can use a previous practice that we didn't do something so well. We can follow up on that the next day. And that can kind of be a supplemental part of the practice that we're doing. So that's kind of my thoughts on that stuff. And as we're setting up practices, what the fall is going to look like for us, we're always going to start with an individual group period at the beginning. Next Monday, the 25th, is going to be our first day of group work. So we'll start our lifting segments that week. We'll also start our individual group segments. So what that looks like is the hitters are going to come in and we'll do all this stuff at the stadium. So as long as the weather's nice, we'll be on the field. And if for some reason it rains on us, then we can always use those indoor cages at the stadium as well. But we'll be hitting Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We'll do defensive skill groups Tuesday, Thursday, and then we'll lift 3 or 4 days a week as well. And then pitchers are going to be with Coach Hunt doing that stuff. And he's extremely organized and he's got everything spelled out for those guys. So that'll be 3 weeks. After that 3 weeks, we'll start team practice. NCAA says on your first day of team practice, you've got 45 days to get the rest of your team practices in, 15 hours a week to do that stuff. And you have to have 2 days off. So for us, we're just going to take the weekends off more often than not. Again, if we get a bad patch of weather where we miss a Tuesday and Thursday, then we'll probably extend into Saturday and take one of those days off. You do that for your 45 days. At the end of 45 days, you can get back into that individual skill period, which we'll probably do for a week or two, and then get into our fall challenge segment and then begin to wind the fall down so guys can go home and enjoy Thanksgiving, come back for the last week of classes and then, have their finals and then go home for Christmas break.
What's the fall challenge?
Fall challenge is going to be 2 weeks of different events for us. So you see it a lot with Division I baseball. It's like their Omaha challenge, essentially. For us, it's going to be 2 weeks of events, and we're going to do a bunch of different stuff. And this is something that we did at ODU, so this is where I got it from. But there's so many different things that you can do. I mean, you can go out on the football field. You can play. You can do punt, pass, and kick. You can do weight room challenges. There's so many different things that you can do. And the best way, at least in my experience, to do it is to put guys on different teams every single day. So the points at the end are all scored individually. And because you're on different teams every single day, there's going to be a differentiation in those individual points. So the leaderboard at the end of those 2 weeks, there's going to be 5 guys that are finishing in the prizes, and those prizes can look like anything. It could be, you get to sleep in your own hotel room bed, or you get a bus seat to yourself, or you get to sit up front if we have to take a van somewhere, or you can run the aux cord. There's so many different things that you can do, and that's probably what we'll look to do with it. But I think more than anything, it's just a really good way to wind down the fall and get guys competing, but not necessarily in the baseball sense. So, I mentioned I like going out and watching high school football just because I like seeing guys compete in something other than baseball. And I think for us, this is a really good opportunity to see them do that type of stuff, but also put a nice bow on the fall because, they've busted their tails for, 12 or 13 weeks at that point and kind of reward them with a little bit of fun.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, the aux cord. Give examples. I like that. Cole, if I talked to you and I met you when you were 18 years old, could you ever envision that you were going to become a college baseball coach, like head college baseball coach? Like if I said like, hey, you're going to be a head college baseball coach someday at 18, would you have been shocked?
I probably would have been at this point in my life at 27 years old. I think I would have been shocked. Coaching is always something that I've wanted to do. And that's largely attributed to the fact that I'm not really good at anything else. So I knew that, when I graduated college, that this was something I wanted to get into right away. And I was really fortunate to play for 2 guys in college that were really, really good role models for me. Anthony Williams, who's at Frostburg State now as the head coach, and Doc Nyman, who's an assistant at St. Joe's out in the Philly area. Both those guys were really instrumental in me wanting to do this as a career, but also being really transparent about kind of what you're getting yourself into, especially as a young guy, and making some really good connections over the course of those early years when um, I hate the word grind because I feel like if you love it, then it's never a grind. If you love it, it just is what it is. You get to do something you love every day. So I've never looked at it like that, but it's challenging. There's no doubt about it. I think you're going to really, as a younger coach and probably not making much money to start out, you're going to have to do some other things just to make end meet. And it's really going to give you a good idea of how much you love this game and how much you want to do this as a profession and how much this means to you. But you got to be in it for the right reasons. It's always going to be about the players and the relationships with the players and the ability to have impact on their lives. I think if you're getting into coaching because you're interested in winning games, then you're not in coaching for the right reason. And I think that's important to evaluate and look yourself in the mirror and really figure out what you're in it for. But even when you're in a position like I am right now and you have the opportunity to go out and hire assistants, if you're looking to bring in assistants whose only goal is to advance themselves in their career, that's probably not a great thing. Certainly they need to have that ambition. That's what keeps the motor running for those guys. But in a position like this, where you get to be a college baseball coach and you get to show up and have the best job in the world every day, your job needs to be centered around service, and it needs to be centered around doing everything you can to bettering the student athlete experience for the guys that are in your program.
Yeah, and what I'll say too, just to follow up on that, and then after that, I do want you to give maybe an example of some of the things you've had to sacrifice and do in order to make ends meet, especially the last couple years. I think it'd be interesting for people to know. Before that, I think one of the things that I do like about you, Cole, and I think one of the things, because you hear people, a lot of people will say the right things, but, at least from my standpoint, I always like observe, like, do they just talk the talk or are they walking the walk? Like, what are they actually doing? And you're a perfect example of that, where, you've turned down even opportunities that would have overnight quadrupled your current income situation, and you turn them down, and just because you wanted to continue with, and actually the opportunities were still would have been within the game, but it just wouldn't have been at the college level, and you turn those down in order to just at the chance of be able to continue to become a college baseball coach. So I think was, I thought you were nuts, but I definitely have a lot of respect for
Yeah.
what what you're doing and what you've done, because you do walk the walk, which I love, and I've told people about that as well too about you. One of the things that I do want you to share, though, as I was saying before, is like an example of you having to just figure stuff out and make things work from like working other jobs. Like take me through like what you were talking about when you said like you just got to figure it out.
Yeah, it looks different for everybody. Everybody's situation is a little bit different. But so I graduated college. I knew I wanted to get into coaching. This was COVID time, so I had lined up a graduate assistantship with a school in Pennsylvania, and because of COVID budget cuts, that fell through. So I was left with a situation where I still wanted to get my master's degree, but I was going to have to find somewhere else to do it, and I was probably going to have to find a different way to make ends meet. I had a really good relationship with the college coach in the town that I grew up in. It's also a Division II school, and I asked him about the potential of being able to come and join his staff at that point, it was just a volunteer graduate assistant. It was nothing special. There was nothing in return for it. And the nice part about it, though, that I was back in my hometown. So if I needed to go over to my parents' house and have dinner or something like that, or do some laundry, that was never a problem. And then, formed some really good relationships with some people in the community in my hometown that were, had a vested interest in the youth baseball program in Indiana, and was able to get on board with that facility and really kind of bringing that thing from the ground up and starting with lessons and then developing into, travel organizations on both the baseball and the softball side. So actually I served as the general manager for that place for a very short cup of coffee. I'm talking like a couple weeks before I ended up moving again. So that was kind of what I did when I was starting my graduate degree. I then had an opportunity to go be a volunteer assistant at California University of Pennsylvania, Division II school, really, really good Division II school in southwestern Pennsylvania. Again, but it was just on a volunteer basis, and I was continuing to finish my master's degree, which at that point was all online. I had a crappy little apartment, and I had no furniture in there. So I had an office chair in the living room, and the TV was on a floor. And I had a big box of DVDs that I'd kind of collected from the $5 movie bin at Walmart. So I was on a pretty steady rotation of watching the same stuff every night and eating the same stuff every day. I never bought Wi-Fi for the apartment or anything like that. So when I wanted to finish my master's degree, I'd have to go down to the baseball office and work on my stuff down there. And then on top of that, I had to get an overnight job so I could coach during the day. So I got a job at Dick's Sporting Goods unloading the trucks at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I drive 25 minutes to the Dick's in Washington, PA, unload the trucks from 2 a.m. until about 11, get done there, and then I'd come to campus and go to baseball practice. So, it sucks while you're doing it. It really does. But I think it's important to remind yourself why you're doing it. If you really are trying to do what you love and be able to do that for a living, you're going to have to make some sacrifices, at least in this industry early on. And I think everybody's pretty transparent of what it's like being a younger assistant in college baseball, where you do just have to figure it out. But there's always ways to do it. If this is really what you want to do, then those sacrifices are not a problem. And then you get in the situation where I'm at right now, which I'm super fortunate to be where I'm at today. But I look back on getting up at 1:30 in the morning to drive to Dick's to go unload the trucks. And as much as I hated it back then, I'm super thankful for that experience. And really, it was able to prove to me that this is what I want to do. So just like you said, when an opportunity comes up for me, like one has done previously, and it's a great opportunity, but it's not necessarily exactly what I'm doing right now. And I've worked so hard to get to this point, and I've sacrificed a lot. And really, in some ways, I've bet on myself to get to this point, because there's probably a lot of people that thought I was crazy. And I've certainly, I'm still a nobody in this game, and I haven't achieved anything, but I've certainly, kind of stayed the course and advanced to where I wanted to get to. So I did that, and I had an opportunity to leave there and go to LSU Shreveport, and, was able to kind of just coach baseball down there, which was great. And then after that, came up to Ohio, and the first year at Ohio Dominican, I needed to have another job. So I got a job at Fastenal selling nuts and bolts. And I was doing that for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So I did that so that I would be able to come over to campus, and, we would do practice, and then I would cover the two lifting groups, and then I'd go home and then do it again the next day. And then, fortunately for my second year, I got to a point where I didn't have to do that anymore. And then I actually handed that job off to Brennan. So, of the tons of things that, Brennan and I have friendship over, it's, we've experienced a lot of the same things. So, he's been getting in the warehouse at Fastenal and selling nuts and bolts for 8 hours a day, just like I did the year before. So, I think he and I have a similar appreciation for being able to do this for a living now. And it's something that we're super thankful for.
Yeah, you guys are cut from the same cloth, now especially since you both have had the same job selling bolts. But no, that's awesome. And I think, at least just from an outsider, just following you now, knowing Brennan as well, man, I'm a little bit envious, because I know just like how cool I'm sure it is to now like have the keys to a college program, and to be surrounded by just like awesome people like you and Brennan. And so I think it's going to be a ton of fun. Hopefully you can just throw me like a beanbag or a small couch like in the corner of an office, and I could just come out and hang out every once in a while, and just get my fix in, because I think it's going to be a ton of fun. I think you guys are going to be building something that's awesome. But if someone wants more information, or if they want to follow you, like what's the best way to connect, or your social media, or just like where should they go?
Yeah, so you can just find me on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. Just look up Cole Schaffer. I don't even know what my Twitter handle is, but I know there's occasionally people dropping us follows or shooting us DMs or whatever, and we'll try to check that as often as we can. The best method is probably for right now emails. So my email is schaeferc@thomasmore.edu. And then, a little bit further on the horizon, as we get deeper into the fall, we're looking to organize a fall prospect camp that will run down at the Y'all Stadium, which I think would be a great opportunity for those Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky area kids, and then even still pulling from Columbus or getting down into Lexington and Louisville. I think our prospect camp is a really great opportunity for those guys to get themselves in front of our staff, but also see the great facility that we have to play in. And then learn more about the program while they're there, learn more about the institution on the academic side while they're there as well. And really kind of ask any questions that they'd have. We're going to have a lot of players down there working that as well. And, as much information as I have to give on the program and the vision for it and where we want to take this thing in the future, and really what it's going to take to be a part of this with us, our players, the ones that live it every day. So those are the guys with the really valuable feedback, and those guys forever and always are going to be our best recruiters. is players getting out and spreading the word about the program.
Well said. Cole, thanks for coming on, brother.
All right, man, I appreciate it.